Welcome to Steward Leaders, a podcast for leaders who understand that our leadership is not about us. I'm Eric Alexander. In these conversations, we explore what it means to lead as stewards, living our leadership for something bigger than ourselves. Listeners, thanks for joining us today. And Dory Wiley, I'm so grateful that you're here for the conversation. Thanks for taking time for talking about steward leaders.
Thank you, Eric. I'm glad to be here with you today.
Looking forward to seeing what thoughts you've got for us. Let me tell you, listeners, a little bit about Dory. He's the president and CEO of Commerce Street Holdings based in Dallas. That's an organization that has some broker-dealers, got investment funds, and one of the things they specialize in is financial institutions. Other things they do, but that's one of their areas of specialty. And so that's how I got to know Dory and his crew from when I was at Happy State Bank, and we intersected on a variety of things. And so he's just been a good colleague and friend here for a little over a decade. So Dory, so grateful for you.
Well, I guess a little bit about me. I grew up in a farming community in the Panhandle called Rawls, or the South Plains, as people up in Amarillo like to say, because they're up north. That may be more the Panhandle. Rawls is a little farming community, about 1,700 people, and I grew up working on a cotton farm and gin, and thought I was doing pretty good when I started my lawn mowing business, and working in swimming pools and country clubs, and went to college at Texas Tech, got out finance and accounting, came to Dallas. Didn't want to go to New York. I'm a seventh generation Texan. I've got a cemetery down in Ballinger with 6 generations, so I wasn't going to leave. And came to Dallas and started working in tax software programming. Then quickly moved over in a year to balance sheet, portfolio, and risk management of banks. Was recruited by a large regional investment bank at that time, Rauscher Pierce, to do the same for them for hundreds of banks, and did that. And then got into corporate financial banks, got to running the financial institutions group there at Rauscher, then left there in 96, joined 2 guys. And we've been partners ever since. One of them's passed away, but the other partner, we've been partners for 29 years. So that's a little bit about me. I'm a little bit nerdy, lots of letters, CPA, CFA, CBA, MBA, RIA. Last I checked, I'm the most licensed guy in the state for what I do with all the vendor licenses.
That's funny.
What does that mean? That means I have to do a lot of continuing ed. I'm continuing ed business. Yeah. And then personally, I'm married, got 2 kids, no grandkids, but I'm lobbying for them. And I am a rabid history nut. So there you go.
And I've been able to hear some of Dory's thoughts on the history side of things too. Quite interesting. We don't have time for that today, but that's worth y'all paying attention to as well. Now, and don't let Dory's Texas down home kind of vibe here fool you. He's respected and heard from all over the country. He's regularly featured media and financial news, and so this is a knowledgeable voice and a friendly face that's heard all around. And so I'm really honored and grateful to have you here today, Dory.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So let's go to part 1 of the questions. So this is Steward Leaders, and I want to talk a little bit about that as it relates to community banks. Of course, the principles are applicable in any industry, in any kind of organization, but community banks is where you've got deep roots, I've got roots as well. So as you're working with community banks, all kinds of sizes, various markets, lots of opportunities, lots of challenges, how does stewardship come into play for bank leaders dealing with challenges and opportunities in their operating environments?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because stewardship's a part of leadership, and it implies a longer term directive, something that's around. One parallel I heard from one banker once is sort of like playing golf. You don't rake the sand trap for you, you're raking it for others. And that's kind of the way I look at stewardship. Because you've already played out of it, right? And, a good banker will create an organization that's just fine without them. And it's amazing how many of them really do a great job. I actually do. I learn a lot from them. I know thousands of CEOs, literally, and some I learn more from others. And it's just amazing what a good job they do. Others, they make it more about them rather than the bank. And it's got to be about the bank. It's got to be about the team. It's got to be more than about them. And it's harder for some of them because they get their whole ego and personal identity wrapped up into a bank or who they are or as CEO. And the more they do that, the more difficult it is to provide for that succession that creates what stewardship is.
I see it the same way, and it's interesting you bring up it's not about them. It's about the bank. And it's not even just about the bank. It's about the various constituencies that the bank touches and serves and affects.
Yeah, it's sort of, not to necessarily bring religion into it, but even if you're a-religious, you can use the Bible as an example of Christianity.
You're not going to bother me with
about
this.
Us. And the more we learn that, the more happier we're going to be in the religion. But that works for leadership and stewardship too. When the more you learn, it's not about you.
Right.
The better things work.
That's good.
My wife sets me straight on that every day. It's not about me.
Dory, it's not about you. Final reminder before you got the door. It's not about you. I think that's a good reminder. Practically, how you talked a little bit about ego. You talked about the not about me as they're facing challenges. Like the regulatory environment shifts. Right now, there's some shifts that feel more favorable to a lot of folks, but it's still change, and change like that can still be complex. With those kinds of changes, with other technology things on the horizon, what are things leaders need to keep in mind from a stewardship perspective?
Well, it's really hard for me to lecture banks about change because so many of them do so well. And as you know, as you lived it, there was never more change that existed than what happened in COVID, which is, we got to learn how to deal with PPP. By the way, no one can come to work, and we still got to take care of our customers and be open for business. And I was so proud of our industry and how, banks handled that. So I really think banks are amazingly resilient. Every time we go through a downturn, whether that be in the 80s, 90s, 2008, 2020, more regulations come out, the pendulum swings too far, we all complain, and then guess what? Banks are still profitable, they're doing well. And if you looked up last week in the market, the banks were rallying and tech stocks were going down, So, banks are really good at adapting to change, and they have to be. And I think part of the reason is I was trying to explain this to a portfolio manager who runs a $5 billion portfolio outside of the banking industry. And he said, tell me a little bit about how you manage portfolios and what you think of. Well, banks are all about managing risk. And that's how I learned managing bank portfolios is managing bank balance sheets first. And so I told this guy, I said, take your $5 billion, lever it 12 times to 60 billion, and imagine how you wouldn't sleep at night because of all the risks that you had because you had so much leverage. Right. A bank would not lend to a customer that levered 12 times. But that's what a bank is. So, they wake up every day, drink every day, eat every day, sleep every day, sleep with one eye open every day, all about managing risk on the minutiae. And they only have one asset class. Their asset class is fixed income. They're in treasuries, mortgage backs, bonds, loans, are all duration. And then they lever them 12 times with bonds. So they're not in equities or private equity, and they don't have timing diversification or asset diversification, correlation diversification. They have to be lending all the time. So they have to micromanage risk all the time. And I think that gets back to your change thing. I think banks are well conditioned to deal with change most of the time, which is against human nature, right? Because none of us like change, right? But banks are trained to deal with it.
So it's interesting. You went straight to the balance sheet, of course, as a banker, former CFO, lived in the balance sheet. That was a big part of my world. And one of the things, so I came to banking from outside of banking, the other side of the credit relationship. And one of the things that struck me when I came over is exactly that point about leverage. A whole lot more leverage on a bank's balance sheet than most of the bank's customers, at least the healthy customers. But then the other thing,
it was probably an eye opener for you because you think of these banks as these real safe, conservative things with columns and stuff, and they got all this money in the vault. And then it turns out, no, they don't have all the money in the vault. They're lending it out, and they're extremely risky. They're highly leveraged hedge funds, and it's kind of a revelation to people when they think about it.
the other thing that's a little bit startling is when I was managing a non-bank balance sheet. Now there are other people involved. I was looking at the credit side of it, our liabilities, and I had, as the CFO, I had control over when we paid those. The lenders on the other side, they might jump up and down and say, we want it now, but I was the one cutting the checks. At a bank, a whole lot of what's going on in my liabilities, my deposits, I don't have any control over the timing of the flows in and out. And that adds another, getting a little technical here, but that adds another really interesting layer of risk that banks are having to manage all the time.
Absolutely. And we saw that in March of 23, right?
We did.
Some pretty big deposit runs that failed some pretty big banks.
Pretty scary. So part of where you started, I think, is really interesting. Is you're talking now about risk, but then you also talked about maintaining a perspective about the time horizons. There's a lot of stuff that bankers and other business people are having to manage that's in the moment. Sometimes it's not just movement between days or months; it's movement within the day, like when we had the liquidity crisis in 23. But we're needing to do that with perspectives that transcend those time periods. What kind of time frames do leaders need to be thinking about?
Yeah, I was explaining this to someone this morning about the difference between, say, a private equity fund and a bank. A bank has money all the time, so it has to do something with it.
Right.
And it's borrowed, so it's paying interest all the time. So it has to do something with it. It may be in Fed funds, it may be in securities, it may be in loans, but it has to do something with it all the time. It can't just sit back and do nothing.
Right.
Now contrast that with a private equity fund that has a 5-year time frame before it has to pull. It can go 4.5 years before it pulls down any money. So it can time the market better. And so a bank is a little more susceptible to time frame risk. If you think about, if I've got a bank in Amarillo, Texas, and there's 4 banks that are a billion and above, and one of them or 2 of them decide to go crazy and lend money at 2% below market rates and pay 2% above market rates, everybody's in trouble, right? It screws everything up. Why? Because they have to be in the market. Now they can pull back a little bit here and then, but they're always in the market, and so that creates a risk that banks have to deal with. And one of the ways they deal with it is they have a lot of equity so that they can expand and contract their balance sheet as needed.
And even the lot of equity, that's relative. You talked about being leveraged 12 times. Well, maybe we're leveraged 10.5 times instead of 12, but it's still typically for a bank.
To me, we are the only private equity or private investor, or institutional investor in the marketplace for the last 20 years that's always said, we are just fine if you want to run at 10% tangible capital. We like it. because if you think about it, when and I know you and I probably talked about this over the year, but when things get ugly and everyone's got to pull back, that's when I want to expand, because I can define the market terms rather than the market defining the market terms, whether that be on loans or deposits. And I get that choice. And if things get really ugly, then I'm buying banks, I'm buying people, and the regulators are giving me a bank for free. That's the great time to grow.
So one of the things too about the time frames is bank balance sheets, they feel a little bit to me like an aircraft carrier, not very nimble to navigate in a small harbor. I've got a big turning radius.
I like that aircraft carrier. I like a little bit bigger deck, please.
So there's a big deck.
My equity.
But I can't turn my ship very fast. There's a lot of momentum from my movement. And so the changes tend to be incremental. I can't just go replace my whole loan book very easily. I can't turn over my whole bond portfolio very easily without some, depending on the market, without some really weird consequences.
That's right. You know, I had a guy that we'd invested in, I'll never forget, in Charleston. He calls me up one day and he says, man, I'm having a tough time competing on the loan pricing around town. I said, well, where are you on the cost of funds? He goes, I'm the highest in town. I go, well, you lose. You know, you can't build that balance sheet from the asset side. You got to build it from the deposit side. That way you have flexibility.
Right, right.
Because otherwise you're not only losing on the good deals on the loans, you're just bringing in lower quality deals at higher rates and increasing the risk.
So I want to jump off the balance sheet for a minute and go to something that's even longer horizon. You talked about being seventh generation in Texas. I think my forebears maybe got to Texas a little later than yours, but if I did the quick math, probably at least five. I don't know. I should have done the math before. But in a lot of banks, the roots are deep. Now, not deep and long in the sense that maybe you'd say in Europe or in other parts of the world where the civilization's been around longer. But there are aspects of bank leadership and bank stewardship that are generational. I've had these conversations with financial institutions when we're doing strategic planning. If you're looking at what do we need to do right now based on what we need to be focusing on over the next 5 to 10 years, but the framework for that needs to be 50-year horizon, 80-year horizon. What are our aspirational principles? What's fundamentally most important to us? Do you see that with the banks you're working with, that kind of legacy?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I had a $5 billion bank up in the Midwest visiting with me, and he's kind of got his life wrapped up in the bank. And his dad started it, and he started it, and he's got his son in the bank. His son doesn't like banking, and they fight a lot. And, you know, so I sat down with him and I go, you know, you may not ever want to talk to me again, but I go, you got to realize he's his own man.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
And so if you want this thing to be a legacy, and he doesn't want to be a banker, you have to figure out how to make it a legacy without him being a banker. Okay. So give you a little bit of example, the Wares, if you look at them over in Amarillo, over the generations, some generations are more involved than other generations. Right. Some have more of an interest and some are more passive. And that's worked for them, you know, and it's still kind of a family bank. And I think that's what you gotta figure out how to do. You got to figure out what somebody's skill set is. And if somebody wants to be a trumpet player instead of a banker, you know, then you have to figure out how it can still be a family bank and family run without that person being the operator, but perhaps, you know, some kind of figurehead or chairman or chairman, vice chairman or something. And until the right person comes along in the family to run it. I mean, it's just because if you don't, you force bad skill sets in a legacy deal, it's not going to last. And I've seen that happen a bunch.
And that's a stewardship issue. It's not just about you and the family, it's about the organization. And so this is one of the things that you just described it. I've seen happen. You get the family legacy, the family succession tied in with the organization's continuity. And it may even be, depending on how it's structured, it may be the ownership is also management and they're kind of, I am the bank sort of thing. Yeah, it's definitely common.
But it's a failure to understand what the bank is, right? It's like, hey, this is the Wiley family bank and we've been here for 200 years. No, it isn't. It may have our name on it, but that bank's been in the community for 200 years. It's the community's bank. And there's been generational families working in that bank that don't have the Wiley bank. It's got to be a recognition of what the bank is. And it's not all about you, right? It's not all about your family. It's about the community, the customers, the employees. There's so many more involved stakeholders than just the family.
So that the way you phrase that there brings up a key part of the stewardship reality. When I'm a steward, I'm dealing with something that's been entrusted to me by somebody else. Financial institutions, by definition, are that. The balance sheet, 90% of what's on the right-hand side of the balance sheet, the funding sources, the equity and liquidity, and liabilities of the bank are other people's funds. I cannot treat it like it's my own little endeavor. I may own the stock, but fundamentally, just like you said, it's about other families, it's about the communities. The bank is a steward itself.
And we've got another stakeholder that's bet the farm on it, right? The regulators, the government, the insurance, they're a stakeholder.
Right.
And so I can't tell you how many banks I've seen where they own 100% of the bank. And I'm like, you think you own the bank and you can just flick off these regulators. These regulators have more at risk than you do. So you're partners with them. They're part of the stakeholder group.
We sometimes feel like they're pesky, and they can be bureaucratic, but they are the backstop, and there's a good reason they're paying close attention and holding leaders to account. How they approach it and their mindset makes a big difference too.
Hey, I've worked on several deals where ownership owned 100% of the bank and they lost control of the bank because of their poor relationship, not only with the regulators, but with management.
Okay. I'd like to turn a corner a little bit, if I may, unless you have anything else you want to touch on about. And again, we're talking banking, we're talking a little bit technical about balance sheets, but all these principles apply in transportation and technology and healthcare and ministry.
Yeah, let's go to leadership and stuff. That's where you want to go, right?
Go ahead. But then when we had breakfast back in November, you shared a phrase that really caught my attention. I want to make sure we get to that. But yeah, let's talk about leadership from your perspective before we go there.
Well, and I think that phrase that you were talking about is, and it's just one phrase that I think about. Everyone has their own style, right? You have your own leadership style. Different people you've worked with have their own leadership style. I'm not very dictatorial. I'm kind of a team guy, and I really don't like to harp on people. I'm sort of management by exception, and I really like to be management by leadership, and it doesn't always work. I'll be the first one, but I really do like that, and maybe because it works for me. I don't necessarily have to be told what to do. Just kind of show me and point me in the right direction. I'm ready to go. And I think a lot of people are that way. But if someone is really true to themselves and people feel like they're honest with them, then a lot of different styles work. But I will tell you, I've had the privilege of working with some very, very impressive mentor type people, either as partners or bosses or whatnot. And we're all a function of who we work with, right? So I've been extremely blessed with that. One of the things, I work with a guy named Jim Gardner, who used to run MBank, and I've known thousands of bankers. I've never met anyone smarter or more intriguing or wise than him. And Jim was a very quiet banker. I don't know if you ever got to meet him, but he was a very quiet banker, kind of stoic, and would just bore a hole in you and stare at you and not say anything for a long time. But when he did, it was pretty important. But I asked him one day, I said, well, you're kind of quiet. You're not overly charismatic. How'd you rise, to the CEO of such a big bank, in Texas at MBank? And his answer was really simple. He said, I ran to problems. Most people won't run to problems. I ran to problems. I fixed problems. People run to me. Problems run to me. Next thing you know, you're in charge of the bank. And you learn a lot by doing that. And that's always stuck with me because it's really no different in what you do, whether it's banking or, let's say there's running into the fire, right? You got firemen. Are you all going to watch the fire? Or are you going to run to the fire? Somebody's got to run to the fire, and there's always a guy that runs there first. And always a guy that maybe takes a little more risk, but he knows it's a calculated risk, and he comes out every time and knows what he's doing. Sometimes you don't know. It's very risky. I mean, there's a lot of companies in the world that have been in trouble where the CEO had to run to the hardest problem and lead by example. The best example I can think of is actually going back to our history is George Washington. So if you think about the Trenton campaign, everybody knows the story about crossing the Delaware, and there's 2,500 soldiers left, and they're about to lose end of their sign up period, and they're all going to go home after the end of the year. So he taxed Trenton while, the British already think they're beat and it's going to be the end of the world. He sneaks up on Trenton. They don't lose anyone. They win the battle. But what people don't know is what happened after that, because the Trenton campaign, and this is the change of the whole war. It's not Trenton, it's Princeton. So in the middle of the night, he's on the other side of the creek, and Cornwallis had come down from Princeton to defeat him, and he leaves the fires on, and he goes to Princeton. And so Hugh Mercer's group is fighting at Princeton, and they're losing. And George Washington runs to the front on his white horse within 30 yards of the enemy, and they're firing like crazy. And he rallies the troops, says, no, turn around. We have to win this. Because if they don't, it's everything. That's it. It's over. We have to win this. We're going to win. And they did. He rallied the troops, and he won. And by winning Princeton, they got the stay of execution they needed, because people started to believe. Right. They renewed all the soldiers coming in, got them some pay, got some money. The French entered the war, and it bought them time until they could find time for Yorktown. Think about that decision making. Him charging to the fire, him running to problems made the difference and the turning point. That was the absolute low turning point of whether we're going to be the most powerful nation in history or just a bygone.
Well, that personal example, and him putting himself at risk at the key moment and the key place of risk. What an example.
Absolutely. And good leaders do that. There's examples with General Patton, at Battle of the Bulge. There's plenty of battle examples of where you did. Joan of Arc did it in the Battle of Orleans. And she gets shot, right? And you got this woman, this little girl, and everybody's running off, and she's leading the charge, and she's got an arrow in. How inspiring is that? Totally fearless. And they win, and install the Dauphin as king. It's pretty amazing. But it's very common in organizations, and you've been in them, to when there's a problem for the collective group to kind of go, oh, that's not good. There's really very few people that are kind of go, let's go fix it and put a smile on them.
It helps, of course, if we've got clarity that we've identified the problem and we're not just chasing a symptom.
Exactly.
So sometimes there's
good leadership on that's important. But what I try to tell people is, it's not just me running to fix problems.
Right. It's us.
We need a culture of that. So every time, if we stick with our bankings, if a teller's running to fix a problem, that's way different than the CEO, because now we have a culture. So when I go to the break room and there's a broken glass on the floor and I'm sweeping it up, that's great. And I'll never forget, I had an analyst here one day that walked in when I was doing that and said, "What are you doing that for? We have other people to do that." I could not have been more offended. We all are in charge of picking up broken glass, or loading the dishwasher, or keeping the place respectful and cleaning up after ourselves. Expecting someone else to do that because you held some sort of title in the organization. That's not what it is at Commerce Street.
Yeah, that's good. I like how the run to the problem conveys an intensity and an intentionality. We're not going to be passive. We need to make sure we know what the problem is, but then we're going to go do something about it. Maybe the first step is we need to understand it better, but we'll be intense and intentional about that too.
Yeah, the whole thing. Identify the problem, evaluate the problem, come up with a plan with the problem. But the whole thing is a plan of attack. Yeah. Right. And it's, again, no different from the metaphor of the battle. Right. We don't just run to battle. We have to have a plan. And, that's really important. Alexander the Great, he's leading from the front against troops, Darius II, and more than twice the size. Well, he's not only leading from the front, he has a plan of attack on how to beat him too. And it worked.
That's good. Yep. Listeners are getting a taste of the history. There's a lot more in his head about these kinds of examples that we're not going to get to today. So one other thing strikes me when I think about problem. Sometimes the business problem, and it could be as a business we're facing a problem, or it could be in a business relationship, an internal relationship, there's a problem. I believe
Oh, that's always an issue, right? Or people
right.
get along, this, that, and the other.
Somebody's insensitive the same day I'm being hypersensitive. That kind of dynamic doesn't help.
Well, I have noticed this, if I panic about something, it'll cause panic for others. If I'm calm about something, it'll cause. If I get mad at others, I've noticed at times getting upset is okay, but it needs to be almost calculated.
Right.
And I'm usually pretty patient. But I've noticed the times where we had the toughest storms, having calmness and confidence has been my best asset. And, going through 08, M&A wasn't happening. Capital raises weren't happening. We're out raising funds. No one had any money. They're all hiding under the desk. No one wanted to invest, especially in banks. What is the strategy of the firm and how are you going to pay the bills? Because all of our revenue streams got broken, and so I had to come up with a new one that appeared risky to some. We got some heated debates about it. And me just being calm and confident about it, won the day, and to be honest with you, those strategies all worked out great, much to the surprise of a few people.
So 08 was really challenging in my professional life too. Very similar stuff, pre-banking, but dealing on the other side of the credit relationship with bankers saying, we can't make that debt service now that we've lost 40% of our revenue. We've got to restructure. Anyway, beside the point, but go into the problem with calmness. I want to come back to the relational problems though, because one of the things that strikes me there is the same intentionality is important. If there's if my professional relationship with a colleague or my boss or subordinate is not what it needs to be, I don't need to be passive about that. I need a reasonably as close to accurate diagnosis as possible, but then I need to do something. Maybe there's some changes in my attitudes or value, behaviors, but often it comes down to, we need to have a conversation.
I have found that 90% of the issue in dealing with personality problems has to do with pride and ego and humility. And some people just don't have it.
Right. It's true.
And so, and if you've been married a long time, you know how to swallow that pride, because woman's not going to say she's sorry. My wife's not going to say she's sorry. Not very often. And so, when a man is in his 20s and 30s, he's not going to say it either. And so it creates a lot of tension. And when you're having fights, you get to be 60 years old, it's like, I don't even know what we're upset about, but I'm sorry.
Right.
But, that attitude, and I'm not trying to be flippant about it, but that needs to happen at work. We're going to be working, every day, 60 hours a week together or whatever it is. And we're going to have some disagreements. I'll tell you a story that really helped out. Tex and I have been partners for 29 years. And in the second year, I got really mad at him for something. Very, very mad. And he knew I was mad. And I don't get mad very often. I'm very slow to anger, but I was mad. He pulled me into the office, the conference room. He sat down. He said, look at me in the eye. He goes, you and I are partners. We have the same belief system. We're in the same company. We have the same goals, and we're friends. We're going to talk about this problem, but we're going to agree up front. We're walking out of here friends, partners, and I'll have all these same goals and belief systems. Otherwise, we're not going to talk about it. And I said, okay. Well, he totally disarmed me with that. And to this day, I can't remember what I was mad about. But I always remembered how he resolved the conflict. And that's the only fight. I'm not kidding you, Eric. That's the only fight I've ever had with him in 29 years.
But you notice what he did? He did exactly what you're talking about here. He ran to the problem. He was intentional, active about addressing it. Now, He attacked the problem, but he didn't attack you.
That's right. And
And
it was a beautiful move. And
that's
I've used
neat.
it, I'll be honest with you, many, many times.
That's powerful.
Yeah. One weakness I have as a manager is if I don't think you're pulling your weight
Yeah.
and I don't think you're doing the right job, I tend to get distant from you because I'm frustrated with you.
Right.
And I'm disappointed with you. And I have to really make myself go sit down and go, Eric, hey, you're not where I think you can be. I think you have all this talent, but it's not happening. And if I appear distant, I'm frustrated. And that's why. And so that's on me. And now I've turned it into it's my fault a little bit, and it's a little better, but that I have more trouble with that act in management than I do anything else.
I understand that. I do. Wow, Dory, there's lots of stuff here we could go explore further, but I want to respect our time frame and our listeners and start to wind down. Anything you want to add?
I liked what we kind of started out with talking about. It's not about us, the old adage, there's no I in team. Everybody's replaceable, even the leader. And when the leader figures that out, then he becomes, more of a steward than a leader. And I think that's important because a steward is a good leader for the long term, even when he's not there.
Yeah. Well, tagline for the show, leadership's temporary. You're only going to be in that spot there at Commerce Street for a finite time period. Hope it's a long time still, but you are investing for the long term. Your stewardship is about forever. It's about what comes later and also all the lives you touch along the way.
I agree.
Well, Dory, thanks for taking time for today's conversation. There's lots here for all of us as steward leaders to be thinking about. So grateful.
Thank you, Eric. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to Steward Leaders. If this conversation was helpful, you can find more episodes and additional resources at stewardleaderspodcast.com. Leadership is temporary. Stewardship is about forever.